아래 당좀 저게 지당은 저 코와래 내디 다 저기 레다 녀모 원기 근데 코와래 기지 코와 니고레스 디네 자당 저기 녀모 바세디야 다 지나 창으로 또 배네 지나 창코로 또 디바디요 말데 이내 창도 와래 되네 아니 저기 전바때 보면 봐자 랭이 바야고 레다 말에 제비기 시럽되게 아니 지금 도시네 세부메바 차려도 안델레안 지금 내가 너를 먹고 쉬어지 아니 녀모바 계제네 디바 먹어서 안디 원교 건 코에 동화 먹고 용어 지기래 되네자 네 장디 비네 동요 말에 세제 어두시는 제 되네자 당 지금 한창 맛에 당하들 체텔이야 지당은 내가 그러나 뒤로 용유배 내양 풀라 안디기 뇌균 첨보지다 동안여야기 내가 같이 용유고배나 디 내가 지겨 말해서 난 내가 되기다 풀이야 편도 용유배나 제나지기 레스고로 와당으로 와 그래서 내기 자다 내가 가래이네 내가 되기 유배네 풀이야 강아 용유배나 디 내가 지겨 말해서 디네 자 배나 저기 칼라 닌지고 신부 여배나야 델리아 둑데리 당샤여나 는 수강게 세게 말했어. 그래서는 신부다 닌지고 여나야 안지수 제리아 안진 강아 저기 여봐서 디하고도 세게면도 와 디나 신제 하나 저기 도시 내가 갑자기 여봐나 풀을 강아 저기 여봐나 디데네게 내가 되게 지겨 말해서 나도 저게 디고 마시오로
Good afternoon. This morning we looked once again at how the reason why we keep taking uncontrolled rebirth in samsara is due to our contaminated karma and afflictions, and all the suffering experiences that we have in samsara all are caused in the same way. And thereafter the text presented the need to refrain from taking intoxicants. We looked at how alcohol, for example, it isn't from its own side that there is anything wrong with alcohol, but it's the effect that it has on our mind, in that it serves to cause our mindfulness, our self-awareness, as well as our wisdom from being becoming quite confused and cloudy, as well as thereafter, as well as the afflictions arising in strength and dominance, and therefore more causes of suffering will be created. So therefore, it's ideal if one can completely turn away from intoxicants, in particular if one has an interest in spiritual development. And moreover, we also saw that we should also look, before engaging in temporary pleasures, we should be sure that whilst we may be experiencing a pleasure on the short-term basis, what is the long-term result? And if the long-term result is that we will actually accumulate causes for suffering, we should refrain. We should refrain. And the illustration was of eating a meal that had been mixed with poison, where one, using one's intelligence, knows the meal is mixed with poison, and therefore, whilst it's tasty, thereafter one will become severely ill. One would, of course, refrain from such a meal. So that's, in brief, what we looked at this morning. Coming to the 11th verse. Make daily offerings and so forth to the three jewels. Also exert in virtue, purify past misdeeds, and henceforth progressively restrain your actions. Dedicate these accumulations of virtue as causes for Buddhahood.
안델이야 안에 제 겹소 좋아 차차와 최고포와 안에 지금 도치네 개와 강투투 지치네 안에 개와 싸우래 해서다 니네 신야 쓰다 니만 따바스 니만 마쳐버지 니미 내가로 제유나 제투나다 강야야로 와다 되면 되는데 니미 찔이야 무뒤 제투시네 니미리리야 건조숨사 답텔이야 나지 겹소줘야다 건조숨 요구송도의 연대제 안델래야 대바기 안지 언도시는데 고야 소수기 누비 강조기야 최고부야 베네메도 부야 연자 부야 이제 부야라서 부야 안디아지 디와지 힘도로 부야 되네게 가래 나 소수게 근데 무슨 예고 부야지 소리 제 최고부야 되라 근데 무슨 매나 소수게 삼노에 매바지네 될야지 되네게 지심보지리다 매도리다도 전에 차상 되네게 같이 뭐시 우주 부여에서 배지네 부야나 최고부야 아니 진에 자세야 어느 꼬라꼬라야로서 받아 되네게 언체가 속세는 최반의 최비직 남랑 망부 두시는 가지고 강투도 제오래 해야지.
Make daily offerings and so forth to the three jewels. So here you're encouraged that on a daily basis, and the emphasis here with the expression daily is that this is something you do every single day, not occasionally. And in fact, you can take it also to mean that where one can engage in virtuous activities such as these throughout a day. So when that opportunity presents itself, certainly do so. But the key point is to, on a daily basis, reflect on both the faults of samsara and the qualities of the three jewels, because these are the two causes to turn for refuge. Reflecting on the sufferings of samsara, wanting to gain freedom, one will then reflecting on the qualities of the three jewels, recognizing that through their guidance we can attain freedom from suffering. Then we go to refuge with sincerity. And then one should engage in a variety of practices to accumulate virtue. So it mentions explicitly making offerings. So one can offer water bowls, flowers, incense, as well as what on the level of imagination, one can make these offerings vast and expansive, offering beautiful, unowned environments and so forth. And then one can also engage in other acts of accumulation, such as prostrations and circumambulation and so forth. And the key aspect here is both the consistency in doing this, at least every day, as well as maintaining the virtuous mind that one cultivates at first, that the sincerity of one's refuge arising through reflecting on the faults of samsara and the qualities of the three jewels, and maintaining that whilst making the offerings.
되네기 최고 피고 그래서 다 되네기 최고 피단 될래 최고 될라 안은 아주 피해 될라 상승의 최바세야 된 두비 최바세 이용고와 대신 아주 매도나 배당 두배 되네기 안에 시세 신도라서 봐 되네기 피해 되게는 상승의 최바로 최고로 봐. 다 두비 최바세도 대신 아주 쇼바시바나 신냠는 지에 림바디 있고로 소수게 안에 셈제 겹소조네 셈제 탐제 디기데 nem버쇼 셈비게 잠바콤야다 셈제다 동화다 자와쇼 셈비게 삼노다 니제콤야 안데네기 안에 셈제한테 동화다 자와다 디기두바다 녜지긴 셈비게 데네 쿨레야게 삼다야 데네장에 셈제 탐주기도 상요고바 토벌 지긴 토벌쇼 셈비게 셈게 고미야들 자주 셈고미야 안데네시네 저기 안 류가 유스미고네 네 산지고바 토고 디치던 류가 유스미고네 샬레네비게 자와 가야 지금에 셈비게 송야게 수림 송야 나데 맞지 디시쇼게 송야 쉬어야 되게 사상도 전 소수게 곰 까마 베네 세간지 지니 소수게 까마 지니 소수게 뒤셀라 바베까지 도시는 곰바이나 안디스 사상 최바체 주비 최바 최고르디네 주비 최바 지상 최바 부여되라 상승게 최바다 주비 최바세 도시네 최바 부여 최바 최고로 봐. 내 최바 부여래 최바 부여할 때 이내 데니고 곰 소수지도 소수 삼로라 소수게 곰 냠레 셈디 곰에 냠렌디 니버슉 처던 거다. 도시는 최바 부여 초사 지와자서 초사제도 소수게 초사랍디다 최고부 디네 고묘도 사라디 다 됐 넘버로 개고로와 제사 파 chik nimbaje mar ruor what kalalo chik savan chik sadi ni sad mar ruor dinaji to se ni tin che gore se de ni me chik je ni je sum je den dao ji je sum ju tham cha ru gu wa lo ji se de sum je ju cha ru gu wa den lo ha je de mang gu cha ru do se ne ya ru re se de do se ne je gore se sum go wa da je zu bi che ba pu ye re so su ge ge wa nyam ne do se ne ju bi che ba cha gore di so su ge nyam le gom ra cha gore gom re ju bi che 니가 자고 레제를
This term, making offerings. So offerings, it's good to have a clear understanding of what this entails, because offerings have different ways that can be understood. The most common aspect, or the most common understanding, will be that of material offerings. One offers water bowls, flowers, fruits, and so forth. And one can do so on a physical level, but also on a level of imagination or visualization. So this is one class of offering. What's imperative with the making of offerings is not the physical aspect of offerings, but it's really primarily the mental aspect that one is engaging in. So that's one part of making offerings. The second part, or the second understanding to have with this word offerings, so the one is material and the second is offering of one's practice. So this is of great importance too. So how does one offer one's practice? Well, for example, this morning, and again even before this class, we generated a motivation. So perhaps we spent more time with it this morning, where one generates the motivation that may all sentient beings, myself and all sentient beings, abide in happiness, a state completely freed of suffering. May no being ever suffer again, but experience only lasting, stable happiness. So this is the cultivation of the minds of love and compassion. And one can cultivate it further, where one generates responsibility for the welfare of others, where one is no longer satisfied with having a mere aspiration, may all beings abide in lasting happiness, but develops the determination that it is my responsibility to guide beings to attain such a state. But to do so, I have to achieve such a state myself, and therefore I have to become a Buddha. Then I can guide others skillfully. So this is the generation of bodhicitta. When one generates bodhicitta, then one engages in the practices of a bodhisattva, or the meditations of a bodhisattva, starting with generosity and ethics and so forth. So one develops the commitment, I will not harm others. I will refrain my mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions, and thereby also ensure that my physical behavior, my communication, is not at all harmful. So, and one thereby engages in the practices of a bodhisattva. All of this is one's doing in meditation. So it's Buddhist practice, it's meditation, and it's also a offering of a practice of offering of one's practice. So therefore, the offerings should be understood as having these components of offerings, which are of material things, and offering of one's practice. And so, I encourage you to engage in meditation such as this every day. Depending on your free time, if you have a few minutes, do a few minutes. If you only have a few seconds, do a few seconds. It took me now a couple of minutes just to recount this. And you thinking through it like that is the meditation. So, if you have more time, you do it longer. Less time, you do it shorter. But it's the repetition that leads to the habituation. It's just like if you, every day, putting a few grains of rice on a plate, every day, just a few more, eventually it becomes quite a pile of rice. And this is what we're trying to do with our mind. Because we're trying to overcome harmful habituations, and to do so, we need to develop virtuous ones, and this requires repetition. And as we continue having engaged in meditations for a period, we start to become slightly more habituated, and thereby it starts to become a little easier, and we start to experience success, and then it becomes much, much easier. So therefore, the two main points: the understanding of generosity or of offerings, both material and practice, as well as the need to engage in meditation on a regular basis.
Nyamlen Jedan, Gawaina, Dinero, and the Lamrim Subene, Dambo, and Zogi, Nyamlen, Comje, Kisudu, Neha, Chiturchevas, and the Kuson to get Dien Jampa, and the Chiki Kasore, Chebo Yomeba Shamba, just that the Niggas, the Dambo Kambati, some Dushana, the Comjasa, Samga, to Pasangma, the Nisha, and the Kuson to get Dien Jam, said that gave you to get past that Jirua, gave you to get Chebo Yudi, Dien Jam. And the Karj was in Cheba Yumeba Shambas, Cheba de Bear, Yahu Ninju Yahuja, and Zangmaja Puyati, Cheba Yumeba Shambas. There's a dinner, and Ya then Devala Dusha, so then Yaboche Deche, and the Lu Namna Che Dunde said, Dushin some dinner Dechen, then no Gomya or the Esos Carcomona, Chichacho Sem Gomia, Niche Gomia, or Dushin, Gomia Tigitus Comji or the Ess. Says that dinner Jivarwada, says that Cho Puyati, that Metoda Bird to Bella Soba the priest, something at Jimba. The negotiation Jamini Chaju Sem Lucy to come together, Cheva to be Cheva Chagor, Dineza, that Dona, Lucin, Tikta, Dunda, Casore, Tikar, Dondal Masona, Babsach Com Japana, Jonachiba Chagua.
What I've just presented, you'll find in greater detail in the great Lamrim texts, such as the Lamrim Chemo or the Middle Lamrim, where it presents near the beginning of the book how to prepare and engage in a meditation practice. And what you'll find then in a more expansive way is what has been mentioned here, very briefly, that one first prepares the place of one's meditation, so making sure that it's clean and neat, and then secondly, one arranges one's shrine with the representations of the three jewels, and thereafter one lays out offerings, and then one sits in a comfortable position and engages in the actual offering practice, where one generates sincere motivation, and then engages in the mental practice of offering. And one does both material offerings, as one continues in one's practice, generating refuge, bodhicitta, and so forth. This is all the offering of one's practice.
Gashin to be chibi never chase or that Peshana Yorba. Chesa Gashin to ba to the Lamigi ma, and then the Tumbasan jumped in there, then she is Sanjigi, Kyon to the Negaduchina, and the Kawa Tuku re, and the Dinetibachi Yoma, Kawa Tuku, Kawa to Dangaras, and that this is the uncharged in Capsule to a chart, our Cho Puala Sobata, do share and then something a chobati, the something a cho puedi, to be chobati, Yabuya Dondala Chagore. Cognere something chobati, then gom the Yabuya, then the gom yamne, then to be chobat. Chesdam, Sanyi, Duchin, Lama, Sanyi, Dus Yamne, Jehore, Makana Hin, so do, Jeodu, Gores, Gashin Jubares. Since the Gashin Juba and the Church Gashin to be Chobachagores. The Chobachadu, Sanyi to Igores. Ya Lama da Sanyi to 2 Igores. She's a Gashin to be Chibi never said. She's a Lama da Sanyi 2 Igor, or the Disha assembly that teaching the bear, what you call a Disha assembly, Yahuchus be 2 never in it, then Dilel Hawajim Yomarvada, not the Chopia. Benanga to give Toboko teaching Migo, Suya, Kala, Tea, do what she said. Go chai don't like Chigurwa. Chesati, medium the Tewaji, Kichi, Yaboshea, and Naji Kala, Sayada, don't teach it. Pajo the Susuki, go chai don't like Chigurwa. Chesati, go sweat and call similar go sweat and Mudi did to Gorwa. Untina Shenda, Sanyi, Lamada, Sanyi, Makalup Nashiba, Jesho said the song, Chigating on to do, and Laland and Yamlan Jevaina, and the Kadugor, Kadubna, and Sanyi 2 Igores, Lamada Sanyi 2 Igores, that Choba Dile Havaji Omares or the Choba Dil have 2 year by the Suzuki Yamnejigoro, Gomjegorad, and did Dimadoma, the Yamnet or the Dirovada Comia. Di Devudi, Mahobana Susune, Sanyi, Nashinchi Chagi, Yungorwa.
And furthermore, by engaging in this practices such as these every day, one is fulfilling a further instruction or advice in the teachings, which is to act in accordance with the teachings or the instructions from your Lama. So this is in the context of how to rely on the teacher. So one is to act in accordance or follow the instructions of the teachings or advice of your Lama. And the advice of one's teachers will always include engaging in a meditation practice that is over a sustained period, every day engaging in a practice. And that practice will include making material offerings and then one's actual meditation of offering of one's practice. So by doing so, one is fulfilling the advice of your teachers. You're acting in accordance with their instructions. Or to express it differently, because your teacher's advice and instruction is no different from what the Buddhas have said, one is also following the advice of the Buddhas, acting in accordance with the Buddhas. This serves to strengthen one's connection through following their advices. It strengthens one's connection to one's teachers, to the Buddhas. And how one can relate to this on a very ordinary level, on a societal level. So if you think of, you have a loved one, and perhaps you invite them over for a meal, you cook a delicious meal, and then you have a nice engaging conversation. The result of that is the two of you coming closer together. So too, by engaging in a sustained practice such as this, as well as the many other meditations that would be included, by doing so, you are following the advice of your teachers, of the Buddhas, and thereby you bring yourself ever closer to them.
부글야 제와 슈주 소소게 부글야 잠겨 슈지 제와 요새 부글 니 부글 롭종 되는 야고 제나 미 야고 되는 차나 선배 제와 슈슈여 되는 부글디기 판매기 롭된 제바나신 판매 레와 나 제와 나신진 부글디기 롭종 제야 될 내가 제베는 판매 부글디 슈가기로와 가선 부글디기 판매기 롭종 제바 나신지고 나 판매디 파슈 제와 제다 부글디기 되는 게 판매 셰바들로 도쇼 짠자 제되는 되는 판매디 부글 거우용 말와 안디로와 제산 디나신 소수기 판매기 바집에 제와 휴제바는 부디게 판매 셰바는 제바는 판매디 부배 하고 제선선 판마야 가고 쉬용을 받아 부기 판마 가고 수tum나 되는 부디 야고로와 디나신 상예이 안아서래 제와 휴제는 안아서 동안에 자고도 안아서 디기 땡기 대와 상예 고방 토고도 선배 제와 휴제제 아니 안아서래 남대는 결혼도 삼도 디네 다샤서는 검자탄rim버데 개와서 두데 송고르와 지난디 송바나진 안아서 두 제베인다 근데 상예 통얘기로 왔다 상예 고로 소야디 간가 두요데다 통얘기로 와제다.
And parents will also know the truth of how this works, in that from deep within you really care for your dear child. And if your child, and because of the care you have for your child, you will give your child advice. Do this, don't do that, study really hard, do not misbehave, and a whole lot of advice around these two aspects. And if your child follows your advice, studies hard, behaves well, your relationship will be very close. If the child, though, disregards your advice, does its own thing and misbehaves, of course you'll still care for your child, but your relationship will not be ideal. It will not be the same. So too, in the context of our relationship with the Lamas and the Buddhas, when they are giving us advice, those teachings, that advice, is because they want us to be happy. They deeply care for us. And they are giving us advice based on their own experience and their wisdom, knowing our own capacity. And thereby, they give us advice that we can act in accordance with. And when we do so, this, from both sides, strengthens our connection. And through the strengthening of our connection, it also enables us, enables our practice to grow and develop rapidly, and thereby bring us ever closer to the attainment of enlightenment itself.
Ngarji diva sha se de kela pechin se da de shi somba na shin ndu shin ne kewa du shin be zui che je so su ge da ga shin gu shin zun ju ge tong ne ne be ba be zui che de ndu shin ne an be zui shin zhu bu gu re sa je be ju gu re se be la kela pechin sa ji ra.
And then the second line starts with exert in virtue. So this, as you see, continues from the previous line. So this we need exert in virtue. So here the Tibetan is just exert, but it will, or make effort. But it will include that with making effort, one should do so with joy, with delight. Making effort in virtue, we should be doing with an attitude of that this is pleasurable to do. So therefore we take care of our mind, being aware of the benefits of what we're doing, so that we don't see it as a chore, but that we see this as how fabulous that I have this opportunity. And thereby, with this motivation, we make effort.
Dine ngarji diva sha la ro de ngarji diva sha su de ge wa nga ma da na ju ge di ni ya zi bi ge da kha sa da gi ni lo nga ma da dine ge wa nga ma ji diva ka re sa sha we na dine gi diva di pa sha dom je go re ji de diva ngarji diva sha se de.
The line continues, purify past misdeeds. So here one calls to mind past misdeeds that one has done and confesses them, thereby purifying them.
Ngarji diva sha se de da diva sha tha de ka ne sha ye khare la ne da nga ju ge de ji ge wa ju bya da ga ran diva sha ye de diva sha go re diva ko nga ju ge jam ni jo kom chan shu sem kom de da ge wa ya chu diva de ma chung ju go ro ba je diva da ga ran diva sha go re diva sha ba de da yin ya da nga ju jian diva sha da de le ya ji nian bo du shi de ne diva sha se de ne ji song go ro ba ji san de ne shi de ne sam da ga san da ngo su ra ko ro nyamang di ba tin che yo re sa be ge ta su su sam lo sta ta nga ra ma je nga shen mi shen da ge ya din di ba sa yo se be ge du shin sam da je ta nyama di ba din sha da no ru chung sha di ti min du se be ge ra san di ba che ba di ge shen le ne ba chung yo re ka nga che yo re an di ra la di ba di ge an de bo di du nga yo ya yu ru ma do di gi ya yu cha yo ma di no ru chung da se be ge da din ge nyama che di ba no ru chung sha se be ge so su ge yo ba ro shi ge je dine che da dine jenanda nge mo ba na ta zawo gi ji me se be da zawo na gi ji me se be dom sem ya ji de ji sho she ba ne re nga zu lu nga yi sun mi ko ne sha la ne ba da zawo ji me se be na sam de de churim so ya ro ba dina ji dom sem da mo ba na ina dine gi ti ba ka ya zawo gi ji me se be da dom sem ge da nge nga che ba la gyo sem ge chi ma ji me se be dom sem ge dene dadi dingan zuge gyab yu, da dien yu, dien diba sha sa, dien sang ye guan, gyab mi guan ju sum sa, da di dun dungi diba sha gin sa, da nyama diba, diringi diba kaan sha gin, san peke sam da je, da gun luan di je, da ngar jebe diba la gyo sim je, chi ma diba jik me, san peke sam la da, din ye je, dene da diringi diba sha gin, san peke da gyab yu, guan ju sum yu dun liang diba sha gin, san peke gun luan di sam da je, jam ni jo kom bai na ni di re da din ji top jam ni jo kom nian bu top jam ni jo jam ba kom ya ni jo kom ya jiang xue sem kom ya ane du so ong kom bai na da ji ge di ba xia guo re ji de di ba xia guo re ge wa du guo re ge wa du ba di da ga ji di ba xia ba cha guo da ji za di du xi ne di ba xia guo re se ji za da ji de nian ma xia ba du xi ne ge wa da du ge wa kom de da de gewa kya sagurwa chisna de nyema diba shagre si dadi de gewa ko nuba cheje ta de nyema shabe gi sa shi bi diba nuba chun shu ru go de khasa shu ba na ji diba da gewa sa kawa so so sem gi den de ye de ro ba ja sem di ba ge chola ya nuba chun shu she ta de nyema gi diba yu cho ba nuba chun shu ra shi ko ru go ro ba chisna diba ma sha go re je chisna da chin chin de ji me sun dom sem ge du she de da chin chin ma diba ma da sa ba na sa ma re je dine du chi ne sha go re che chi san yin bo dop shi se de ne ji yin bo sun chin bi dop se ding yi dop se da yin bi dop se da ne lar mi dop dop se do topshi se disora da dondala nyama diba chige de tende da diba nodu chunsha pesa sha de se di su gyoba ji che de maung ba ne chinje na zawa chigi me sembe ge samlo na da domsim de ge de ne gyu dengi top de gyu de pa ansa da diba di dunel ya diringe ning ta ba ne diba de shagi samje de ne nan ju ge ja chue sem go mya ni jo go mya an dire ju ma ju na cha che ya de an nga ju ge jing nga me ne da ya da de ne cha che ya chue bu pu ya cha sa da de ne ge de shi ang ju ge chue bu pu ye ri di de ju go mja de chue bu ye de da bo gung long diba sha ge sam da che be ne 먼저 디바디 제바도 교심제 친진의 지금에 삼다 되는 주지 권초 숨지야 덴딜이야 전부 포와 지메도 포와 두베 포와 마메 포와 아니 신도 알아서 포와 아니 되는 소소라 잠니의 자주셈 고미야 도스는 공바이나 다디 님보 뜻이고니 디바 샤바세 디디 샤산디레다 돈달은 님보라 대시 먼저 공자산데 다라래 공자 쇼비다 자기도와 디 제베나다 디바 샤바 차고래 개와 错杀吧，地方下吧，现在你个用个错杀吧，这工业的叫做错杀吧了吧？第嘛出去了的地方农穷多的地方下吧才够了吧
？When we spoke about purifying non-virtue earlier, I spoke about how as we accumulate virtue and we strengthen our habituation to virtuous, wholesome ways of thinking, this naturally serves to weaken our non-virtuous habituations. So this is how the process works. But here it's referring to a specific approach to take. The fundamentals remain the same, but there is a structure that when one wants to specifically purify misdeeds, there's a certain structure of relying on the four opponent powers that one employs. But it comes down to the same thing. One is strengthening virtue in order to purify non-virtue. So these four opponent powers, the first is one of regret, where one recalls past misdeeds that one has done. And one can either recall things that one specifically has done, so one recalls where one has acted in a way that perhaps brought harm to another, but certainly where one accumulated the causes of future suffering. Or one can imagine that at some point in the past, whether this or a previous life, one would have done so, even if one cannot remember now. But the point of this first opponent power is to generate sincere regret for such misdeeds, knowing that causes suffering to others, as well as the negative karmic imprints that will lead to suffering for oneself. So this is the foundational opponent power, regret. So one generates powerful regret for such misdeeds, knowing that one will suffer because of this. Then one comes to the second, that of restraint. So this is similar to when we heard restraint earlier, ethical restraint, where one commits to not engaging in such behavior again. In particular, restraining one's mind from going in that direction again. So this is often called the power of the promise, where one commits to not performing such misdeeds again. The third, and this order can change, but in this presentation, the third is the basis. So one recalls the three jewels, and recalling that their qualities, and thereby under their guidance, one will be able to turn away from misdeeds and abide in wholesome ways of thinking and acting. And it's to them that one makes the commitment. And the commitment one can express as the commitment to not act in that non-virtuous way again, because that is contrary to the teachings of the three jewels. It's contrary to our spiritual development. So therefore we make the promise to the three jewels that one will rather live in accordance with their teachings and thereby refrain from misdeeds. So that's the third opponent power, regret, restraint, and then that of the basis. Then the fourth is that of the antidote. And here one can engage in any virtuous activity, and it's usually one is encouraged to engage in something one feels an inclination to do. So perhaps one has an inclination to meditation. So one may meditate on love or on compassion or bodhicitta, or one may prefer to do prostrations or recite mantras such as the Mani mantra, or one can make offerings. So the fourth opponent power is that of the antidote. And the antidote is the accumulation of virtue, just like we've been hearing over many times in our weekend together. And the way that this process of purification works is where both virtue and non-virtue, or negative karmic imprints and positive karmic imprints, where they abide is on our continuum. This is where the imprints or the energy abides that leads us to have the inclination to act or think in certain ways. So this all abides on our continuum. So what we're doing through this process of the four opponent powers, just like through the process of accumulation of virtue, is we are strengthening our habituation to wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking. And that by its very nature weakens the opposing side. It's just like a scale on our continuum. We're strengthening the one side, and thereby, naturally, the other side weakens. And earlier in this verse was reference offerings. So if one is about to make offerings, and wants to do this, utilize offerings as the antidotal power, so as to purify misdeeds, then one does the preceding three, and then makes one's offerings, generating regret, the restraint, the commitment to not do this again, making this promise to the basis of the three jewels, committing to live in accordance with their teachings, and then making the offerings. And in this way, through the accumulation of virtue, one also purifies non-virtue.
This lanchi domba jera jes. So that the lanchi domba said never chimana jigme said domsim giva di tikazin. Tu chine nyamlin che de kabla de jera jes dus and ya rures. Then the Dorje Nanzuki and Janju Chaya, the name Yamnichiva, the name of Papiokoba, the Nisa Yokoma Toya Dusin Yungore, Sungdoa.
The third line, henceforth, progressively restrain your actions. This word for translated here as restrain. It's the mind of restraint. It's also the word for vows. Vows are restraints, where you restrain your mind within the realms of virtue, restrain your mind from non-virtue. So henceforth, having engaged in purifying past misdeeds, one commits to progressively restraining your actions. So as one develops ever greater habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, one is ever more easily able to turn away, restrain from engaging in non-virtuous ways of thinking. And this is how we spiritually develop, developing towards developing actual definite emergence, actual bodhicitta, and enlightenment itself.
Dinigi chebo puya da jam ninja komya, chanchu sem komya, and surum soya, and dinigi sebe nyamna jada, jimbe nyamna chade that dusine gawasaya da, dusaya do, dine dibadi ma chung ruores. Ine that diba sabona jeba, zawakine meva chatu gribesene, disugi meva chatu marejita. That dine diba sabona jeba meva jajumba. Topala Sanjo Topala Diva Sabun Bacha Meva Sukuri. Chesan D Suvala and Jajusem Niji Jajusem Gomana Passion Jimba Sunu Subi Yamne Jene and the Desugis Gawa Batumeba Sagordina Desu Nyomo Sabon Jebadi Sabon de Meva Sutumare. Dime Sumadon that Digalia Yamne Karagar Kuguresine. Dame about to be shut up Congo, as you were that Dame about to be shut up combina, don't buy you to be shut up, Digombaina, that Digi, and the Savona Java Mavas you can do as well. Dipa Sha said it, Dipa Sabona Java, Savona Java, Shia did that, don't buy you Congo, as well.
There are two further ways to understand purify past misdeeds. Or to understand really the word to purify. So thus far what I've presented is ways to significantly weaken our non-virtuous karma, significantly weaken our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking by developing wholesome ways of thinking. And And there's a wide variety of these, such as cultivating love, compassion, generosity, ethics, definite emergence, and so forth. All of these wholesome ways of thinking serve to weaken our non-virtue. And that's, again, with the illustration of the scale. We strengthen the one side and thereby proportionately weaken the other. But what it doesn't do is eradicate the non-virtue, completely destroy it, or as it's often expressed as, cut it from its very root. There is one additional practice that needs to be cultivated. That is the wisdom realizing selflessness, or the wisdom realizing emptiness. This particular wisdom, and this particular wisdom alone, is what can destroy or cut the very root of all our afflictions. All the others are indispensable, but they serve to reduce or suppress our unwholesome ways, our afflictions. But it's wisdom that destroys these.
Marik ba sa de so la de nga ju an di pa sa go re de ne di pa sa ba de nyo mo ba ka so re nga ju du nga nyo ya cha go re sa che se sa nga ju du nga nyo ya ju de ka re se ne nyo mo ba de ka so le je bo ju ji le de yong go re di ju ju ka re la ne de cha ko ro nga ya ane ji ge te zum la so ba da marik ba la so ba da ma la de ne ge de ne ju ji ju le de nyo mo ba de ji go re sa che si go ro 단 되샤되게다 코로디에 가는 스키고래 해야지 양식 삼다 저와디 야 심주다디 고 심주를 봐서 내세를 봐서 내세 토르던 거로 와다 되샤다 코로디에 가는 기그래라게도 나 세번가 라신 두바지베 텐진들이 기고래 해제다 기고래 디당은 좀 요모바게 그 중요하게 싸워디 디레스 지산 디메 봐서 고고래 해제다
What's already been stated is that from our afflictions such as anger and attachment, pride and jealousy and doubt, from these we accumulate non-virtuous karma, which then ripens into our varying suffering experiences. But from where do these afflictions arise? How does attachment and anger arise? They come from, all the afflictions come from the same one root cause, and that is ignorance. And there are many types of ignorance, and this is a specific one, which can be called the ignorance of self-grasping or the ignorance of true grasping. This ignorance is the root cause from which each and every affliction arises.
지사 당하는 주기도 지내 아주 삼담에다 아주 rak바라과데 gen가서 하고 두로 앞에네 당봉아 줄 콘로시키에 나다 대 유지래 착베기 착바시키에 나다 지 당봉아서 가서 섬다 나 세삼의 고고르데 나 세데 나 세삼 코르신 나를 균지지기도 센디네 코르사고다 당봉 나 세삼을 디네 나를 균지지기도 와서 디네 코르사고래 지사 당봉 나서도 베니절라도 나라 프리디 고도 센데니 차바기 거래. 제가 담보 교로 나서 나 세베 삼도 리고르다. 나서 퇴자 깨나라 콘로 깨나라 엔지 나게로 깨외나라 나 세실이 거래. 나 주게 되게 계주로 두이네 나 세 담보 리고르다. 지 검제기 나 아니 그 참디가 두이 세베 나 세삼도 리고로 나 주기라. 제가 당보거랑 세베 삼도 리고르 당아서 디 용구여 받은 가서 내가 가래지 나보 나세 내가 제가 두기 당보 나디 코라지 din 내가 제가 두기 나세서 나제면 제가 두기 제가 차소 나 조도도 당보 나세 삼도 고고와 당보 안디 제래다 지게 공로지야 되자지야 내가들 자와 제게 되버지야 차서 두신 나 세베 삼도는 리고래 진짜 나 세베 삼도 다 저어디 최고래 자와디
So to look at this just on a course level, if we think of both, because this is a process for all the afflictions, so take attachment and anger. If we were to rephrase attachment, it would be, I want. And if we were to rephrase anger, it would be, I don't want. And what do we see at the basis of both of these is I. I want, I don't want. So this, from the sense of I, and this grasping at this sense of I, comes this, I want this, I do not want that. And this is how we also talk, and we talk in this way because we think in this way, on a subtle subconscious level. So someone asks, what did you do this weekend? I was on retreat. I was meditating. And someone asks, how are you? So, I'm a little cold. I'm a little hungry. So we talk like this, but even it's not just an expression of words, but at the heart of our thoughts is this grasping at a self. And from the self or I that we grasp at, all the afflictions arise. There's a famous verse from Chandrakirti where he says, from initially grasping at an I follows attachment for things as mine. So here we see this process of first grasping at oneself, then we think of something as, this is now mine.
다기 지용을 차게봐서 delea pe damdu simbe 차와겐 damdu simbe 줘 다디 차서 봐나 라바네 된 셈테시 용 거래 가르스는 안 줄이야 내리에선 담지 숙침 부여와 대시 만년에 내리에선 배 담지 숙침 매와서 차서는 샤라샤 셈레 강아요 마 다주 소중요선 내리에선 낙선지 다도 진짜래 다도 숙침 부여와서 디마 라바다 차반데 내가 셈테다 마기버 주고 차데 디용 거래 해서와다 So to
see this play out, imagine the situation where you want a particular new phone, and maybe yours is aging, and now there's a new one, and you're really quite excited to get it. Now think of two scenarios. One, where you have the phone, you bought it, it's now yours. And the other is, before you bought it, it's in the shop. In both, it's in the shop and it's owned by the shop. In both cases, it's dropped and it breaks. So when the shop assistant drops the shop's phone and it breaks, or you drop your new phone and it breaks, your emotional response is completely different. It's the same phone that's broken, but in the one, we're grasping at that phone as mine. In the other, this is someone else's problem.
that yo mares na denige gangla ma do rang ngone do yo mares chesa mena denige gangla ma do rang ngone do na do go tin na wa na sin da re samne na se bi zimba di wa di nga tin del denige samno de la nga rang sing do ba zimbe zimba se de nga temba do ba zibi den zin so da nga zo nyomo ba ke ge za wa se nga zu gyule di re so da di re so chesa nga se de lole pa na yo de gang la ma de ko rong ngwe ni du du ge ko rang gu ngwe ni du du ge sin nang go re na wa la chen da ga ra yo re se me jin de ge jin go re di jin bi de lo de la da se ma re ba den se ma ri ba nyo ma tham ji chung ye za wa di re se sa di ko le na ya di da den ba du di yo ma re se me ba jin nang go re na de ni ge na jin jin du go wa se che sa nyo mo ba yo sa di za wa di re da se ma re ba se de den ni chil la gu re se da
throughout this meditation, one needs to use one's intelligence, thinking for oneself, investigating, analyzing. The very first step of the meditation, which is challenging to do, but we need to look at it again and again. How does our sense of I appear to our mind? How does it appear? And this is challenging to see because we're so habituated to this our sense of I, we're not used to thinking about it. But how it appears to us as if our I or our self is somehow independent of our aggregates, of our body and mind. It seems to have its own form of self-existence that is not dependent on the body and mind. It's independent of the body and mind. This is how the I appears to us. And we have a consciousness that grasps at this appearance, as being true, or as being real, as being in accordance with reality. This is called true grasping or self-grasping. Grasping at the self, so self-grasping, or true grasping, which is the expression of grasping at the self as if it exists truly in this way that it appears to us as being independent of our body and mind. But the self does not exist in this way, and therefore this consciousness that grasps at the self as existing in this way is not in accordance with reality and is therefore an ignorance. And it's from this ignorance of self-grasping or ignorance of true grasping that all our afflictions arise.
Tadi nawa na shinji duye mundu se jeba che orang azu. Ta jeba che de kawa jeba che orang sene. Ta nganzu ye na kawa yo orang nganzu de subu di liyo korwa. Chesa ta nganzu subu di nga denege nawa na shinga kanglai ma to rangwe ne tupe nga di rebe sene de subu di ne ma re se ore da. De subu di me na pena nganzu shi ne shi do de subu di me wa zui go de ine nga du go re se le go wa nga du go. Chesa subu di ne ma re se. 나 수부 마이나다 셈디레베스네 대한 셈디야 말해서 진짜 셈디야 자금도 진짜 디네자 나 세야디 셈 기부유비다 셈 둥어여바다 디네게 나서 용거를 진짜 디네 셈 둥어유에 셈디레베스는 디야 말해서 근두시네 또 심주체도 갈라 디네게 나디 갈라에 마도 코롱원에 줍디게 나디 니에 제거 말해 그래서 풍부해야지 신법과 차세 망보지를 되는 지지를 되는 줍디게 제거래 대신 나디 강라에 마도 랑원에 줍 코롱원에 여받는 거 봐. 나와 나지 강라에 마도 랑원에 줍어 주나 풍부디 말해. 그래서 풍부디 차세 망보시 우지를 되는 줍디고 강라에 마도 받지 말해 와. 진짜 나디에 말해서 다네 셈디레베스네 셈디야 말해 셈세야 아직 깨진 아치 두마 망고 초발을 지지를 되는 줍디거래 마도 마도바지 주야셔 말해서 매바 제가 되니게 나디 셈디가 있나 마도 강라에 마도 코롱원이 줍어진 거 그래 되네자 셈디 깨진 아마다 치마다 되니게 망고지 되는 줍디바 차기도 와서 되네 삼다도다 류다 셈강에 때도 제베나야 강 소소라 나와나지 강라에 마도 랑원이 줍어 가사데 민두 선배게다 타미에 다시 누우진 제바제제 강점직이야 되네기 사대 자와기는 민두 선배게다 그냥 민두 쓰면 동상지 로를 차지 지기 하고야 지금 거래지 되네 동상지 민두 선배 셈 타주비게 동상지 통여도 다음에 또 말이야라고 그래 딜로디 곰제 뉴버처처 땅이 되네 나 새벽에 나 줄에 지우 담징에 로디 파 뉴버 춘추도 그래서 되네 이도에도 되네 나라 녀서 네 자오레 네 년에서 네 집에 차바지야다 디네 자오레 집이기 네 콘르세데 디지 용고 말해서 진짜 나세베 샹려 통조다 가지야다 용고 말해서 진짜 디네 자당 다음에 될이야 디니게 나 간라에 뭐도 랑고도 낭수 나시 나와 나시지 풍보다 셈강도 유에면도 제 심주지 제바제여도 안 제바제여도 갑라 안 되네게 가야면 봐 윤에 많이 봐 다가 민도 쓰면 동상으로지 이거래서 대 하고 그 로디다 곰제야 뉴버처처 땅에도 네 디글로데라 동바이도 로레스 디야 곰지 누바 셔셔 당고 고레스 니곰 땅에도 다 녀모바 자와니 마음이야 수행 디디에서 오다
This meditation has a number of steps. The very first is to really get a feel for how the I appears to us. The second then is to investigate whether the I exists in the way that it appears. So again, this first step is, how does my sense of self appear to me? And the way that it appears is as if it is something independent of our body and mind. Our body and mind does not impact it. Our sense of self remains in a way that is unchanging because it exists by way of its own nature and therefore is not impacted by the body and mind. So this is the way that it appears to us. And that's the first step. The second then is to seek it out. And to see if we can find the I that exists in the way that it appears. So if the I exists in the way that it appears, there's this independent I, the only place it could possibly be is over here with our body and mind, not somewhere else in the world, but right here with our body and mind. So we search for this independent I, first in the body, then in the mind. So this independent I that appears to be independent of, for example, our body, we look for it in our body. So we look for it in our body in varying ways. So mentally, we separate our body into several of its parts. And we divide our body up, spread it out before us, and we ask ourselves, this independent I, in which of these parts is it? And of course, our I cannot be found in any body part, because that body part is not who we are. It's merely a body part. Moreover, what happens when death comes? When death comes, our continuum continues to the next rebirth, and this body is just left behind. So certainly, our I cannot be found in this body. So then it must be in the mind. This independent, self-existent I must be found in the mind. So this now is the third step of the meditation. The first was to recognize how it appears to us in this independent manner. The second was to seek that independent I in the body. And now the third is to seek the independent I in the mind. So we investigate looking within the mind for this self-existent self. And we ask ourselves, in which consciousness is this self-existent self to be found? This consciousness, there's this I that is not impacted by the mind because it's independent, and therefore the mind doesn't impact on it. So we can divide our mind up into the feelings of happiness and suffering. If this independent, unchanging I were a particular consciousness, such as happiness, because it's unchanging, we'd always have to be happy. But that's not the case. So too with suffering. If our unhappiness or our suffering were this independent I, we would continuously suffer. But that too is not the case. And then if we say, well, what if it's not our I isn't to be found in any of these obvious manifest individual consciousnesses? What about if it's in the continuum that goes from life to life? So then we think about this continuum of consciousness. It is made up of individual moments. One moment leading to the next, one moment leading to the next, one moment leading to the next. So where in there is this self-existent I to be found? If it was in the previous moment, it would have gone out of existence. If it was in the next moment, it wouldn't have come into existence. And if it were to be found in this present moment, what happens when this present moment becomes the previous moment? So we then cannot find our I in our mind either. This independent, self-existent I hasn't been found in the body or the mind. So that means it does not exist in the way that it appears. This is the fourth step. The I does not exist in the way that it appears. The first step was to recognize how it appears. Now in the fourth step we say, I've looked, cannot find it. Therefore, it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. This is the realization of emptiness. There is no self that exists in the way that it appears. So it's the realization of non-self or selflessness. So this is the meditation that, if engaged in repeatedly over a sustained period, will eventually cut the very root of our afflictions, and our afflictions can never arise. And whilst we engage in this meditation again and again, but before our realization is so powerful that it can cut the root, it will weaken all our consciousnesses of self-grasping, because we'll be recognizing that I'm grasping at a self that does not exist in the way that it appears. It's an illusion. Therefore, my friend, so this relationship, the relationship of my friend, so the quotation from Chandrakirti, through initially grasping at a self, follows attachment, clinging to things as mine. My friend is dependent on a self-existent I. And if the I doesn't exist in the way that it appears, then this isn't my friend. Likewise, my enemy. So when we no longer then can really justify this relationship of my enemy, my friend, our attachment and aversion towards them weakens. This is the process that we go through. So too with pride. The pride that's arising in relation to our exaggerated sense of self. When this sense of self we know is an illusion. So in this way, this meditation on emptiness serves to radically weaken and eventually eliminate the self-grasping and all the resultant afflictions.
Dinigi dus chene gomgore dame patobelo gomgore saje dinigi sungorwa dini zadang juge dinigi ane nga saide ganis yore labduda na dona ganis yore sene gala ya modyo ba rang ngwen duba na shinji duba chi nawa na shi yo mares ine nga sa garasna pa xianji le dune pa lue pa da ba zam ji yore saje da yo dini chi ma do yo mares ro chen le dune pa lue da ba zam ji yore.
Then the final step, those before, the fifth then, is we've come to, in the fourth, this realization of selflessness or emptiness, where we've realized that the self, the I, does not exist in the way that it appears. But that doesn't mean the I does not exist at all. The fifth step is to recognize that the I exists merely labeled by mind. By merely labeling the self onto the body and mind, we can talk about a self. That's all. There's no self-existent self. The way it appears, this doesn't exist. But we can talk about the self being merely labeled by mind.
지난 디네기 냠네 지네다 건조 숨ल्या 최와 부cap수로네 디네 최와 부야다 디네 대시셔바네 메도푸와 두베푸와 부에푸와 메도라스 바다지 유제 두진 상생기 최와 부야 디네 낭 주비 최바텔야 잠니제 자주셈 아니 진바다 수전의 쇠바다 준주 공야 디네 삼대 공야 디네 디지 다음에 봐도 디네 동방이 도베 제바제 디네 그 공야 되게 주비 최바 두시는 공발에 디네 아니 야 지기 뉴벌 마스 공 제라 야야 체르지는 된데 탈바다 탐지 기보고 번 독고래 해서지 어두순 거다.
Of the 6 key practices that one engages in, we've previous to now, we've looked at those of generosity, ethical restraint, patience, joyous perseverance, and briefly mentioned concentration. And now here we've spoken about the 6th, that of wisdom. So in this session, we've already spoken quite a bit about generosity, with a twofold division of material generosity and generosity of offering one's practice. With material generosity, offering of water bowls, flowers, and so forth, and offering of practice, this will be one's wholesome minds that one is cultivating love, compassion, generosity itself, ethics, and right up to wisdom as well.
취빈이 발시에서 책으로 와대 상이기 두시는 냠는 제고래 두시 제고래 두 로정 제고래 송바대 안 경험 중에도 지게 무지진 대님이 인가도 시고로 와 제가 상이 송바 나시 가신 주바의 지고래 되네 주비기 쳐봐 책고래 주비 쳐봐 책고래 되네기 가신 주바 되네 자다 상이 아주 무슨 매지마 상기기 나를 통구 제거 마시고로와 긴고로와 제자다 지샤 빼하고 지우도서 지샤 선배 상기 통이야 차고 제자디 경로들이 지금 눈에 참대 비린을 되게 또 셰셰바디 대가신 두비기 최바 차고래 제자디 상기 녀버 제기 제자 소소라라 가고 고미래 되네 자다 되네기 냠는 제발 되네 가서 무슨 강사 개와 상기 규롱오 세대 소소게 되네게 개와 사셰베 개와디 야 한샘제 탐지교도 산교고 토벌쇼 세비게 귤이야 뭐 자고래 세월다.
So thus far on the retreat, you would have been getting up early in the morning, and right from walking in here, you would have been engaged in a wide variety of practices throughout the day, and also even when you aren't in here, you will have been trying to keep your mind on the various teachings that are being presented here, and doing so until you go to sleep at night. So over these couple of days thus far, so much merit has been accumulated by everyone here. And these practices, or this way of living, the way of thinking that you have been generating, are all in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha. So this also then is the practice of following or fulfilling the wishes, the advice of the Buddha. And whilst we can't see the Buddha with their omniscience consciousness, the Buddha is completely aware of what we are doing. So from the side of the Buddha, there will be great delight that we are making such efforts in the cultivation of minds of virtue, creating causes for lasting happiness, creating causes so that we can be of ever more benefit to others. And this then, by our spending our time in this way, will be strengthening our connection with the Buddha. Now lastly, we come to, as we see in the 4th line in the 11th verse, dedicate these accumulations of virtue as causes for Buddhahood.
Dharna Jedang Chiwi Dunamso, Jibu Gishin, Jibu Chiwena, Droda, Nedulaso, Gunyi Lu, Luamebi, Choni, Damchi Yins.
The 12th verse. In brief, each time we are born and every time we die, we are born alone and we die alone. Thus our friends, loved ones, and so forth all let us down. What never lets us down is the sacred Dharma. The short lifespan is fleeting like a flash of lightning.
어다 가상 donda 가상이 쉬바래 지자 donda 덜 뒤바이나 가서 오르스네 제와다 데델이야 녀리야다 두신 제거든 시망고 송사로와 지자다 디속이 닝보 쳐선 뒤바이나 다는 donda 제와다 치와 치위 뒤남수 지부 계신 지부 치외나 세대 소수의 계획 갑래나야 아메코반 소수 지부 계획 로과당 규절라 제 가야 해요 말했어 로바양 가야 티에요 말했어 소수 지부 계획을 해지래 다 소수기 시위 갑래나야 다 지기 가 대지 열슈바다 가상 슈바나지 규절라 가제 여바나 가야 해요 말했어 안에 지게 소수기 인유도도 분야당 조보다 지키고 주변에 왕제 첨보다 소수기다 마음이로다 구성화다 같이는 제태야 말았어 지부 뒤넘도 지부 치위 뒤수 지부 계신 지부 치외 나서 소수 지부 줘야 돼. 제가다 전달해야면 제가 맞아 랑게 기내 송데 마시 봐도 자 첨부 휴저 송급제데 제데 류디야 해야 말았어. 제가 전나 제와당 제위가서 지부 제와 치위서 지부 줘야래서 전나 제당 치위 뒤남수 지부 계신 jibu chewa naas. Na Jordan nidu laso, kunji lu, sede lu sede, jinada lu lamna gogo tangwaro se chago jida tsikdire. Inada dadi de gogo tang sede tata, chigumba kasi kaya desugi, kaso, da, 시디 가서 좀 이제 다 그리 나 지속이 팽기를 sabbe sam다지 자치 뭐 쇼지 지거할 때 이나 디니기 시위 갑라 지속 관계라 팽베 저 계념도 개매바래 개매바서 다 시위 갑라 디 관계야 판투고 말해 사실
This verse it's very similar to what we covered yesterday. But it's expressing it slightly differently, and still with the same truth, that all of us, when we came into this world alone. We came into this world not accompanied by our loved ones from our previous life. We came into this world not carrying all our possessions and wealth from our past life. We didn't even come into this world with our reputation and prestige from our past life. All of that was left behind. And similarly, when the time comes for this life to end, no matter who we are in this life, no matter how powerful and how much prestige and how great a reputation we have, we will all die in the same way. We will leave all of that behind. And just our continuum, surrounded or covered by its imprints, will continue. In the third line, our friends, loved ones, and so forth all let us down. So generally, we turn to our friends and our loved ones and our possessions for support, for help when we need help. But when it comes to leaving this body, moving into our new body, they cannot be of any help to us. And if we do leave this life with fear, with need, they will not be able to help us. And this is not, of course, to look down on our friends and our loved ones, but they cannot help us either.
시위 갑래 케르야 여봐 개와 치만함래 펜배 유딩 차상라야 안지기 탈바다 탐지키며 고만 토발래 팽규 여봐 시엘리야 펜도 주발래 펜도 유딩 디가르는 루어메 봐 초디가르스네 담배 쉐디리 담쉐디리스 다디냠는 제고래서 제자도 루어메 배 담배 초네 담배 쉐디리스 다디지 가상한 슈바나 이제 제자 담배 쉐디가르스는 대진이야 주냐래 냠는 제디리 겹수죠 나 semje tamji de sanjo ko ba towar ji shi to ane kunwa cha jue semje kunne la ane jan lia jamba da ni je da zawa de ko ya da na ji so ji jam jin be nyam le su dum so ya so bo kom ya da ande da de ji da me ba to be shera kom ya dus de kom ya de da da me chue ri di chue che ba le ji sa di lu a yo ma da shi di shi du nga zo sem na la yo ro ba da sem na la 누버 데 샤유 바도 셈데가 아웃나 디뇽도 두고래 제가 개와 치마래 디기 팽거래 탈바다 탐지기 먹고 바다 디기 팽거래 체델라 디기 팽거래 제가 너 루아메 바 너주기니 메데게나 파도 여바데 디레스다 제가 루아메 베담베 취인세 다 디냠네 제고래 사실
And what does never let us down is the sacred Dharma. And this and to the extent that we cultivate minds such as love and compassion, minds such as generosity, ethical restraint, patience, and the wisdom realizing selflessness, to the extent that we become habituated to these, this life we will experience benefit. We will be happier. We will be more at ease. And the impact that we have on others will at the very least be much less harmful, but actually will be greatly beneficial. So great benefit will come to us in this life from cultivating the Dharma within. And so too, when the time of our death comes, we'll easily be able to let go of all that materially surrounds us because we know we'll be accompanied by powerful virtuous imprints. And those imprints will continue to help us in our future lives. So therefore, this reflection points us to putting ever greater effort and energy and time into cultivating the minds of the Dharma within us, And this comes about through the recognition of the benefit that will come in this life, the time of death, in our future lives, and our ongoing spiritual development.
어디니기 담비치레사 당한들 판도 요간데 디레스 다디 내가 저기 다디 루아요마 노트기네요 말해서 그러다 디나디게 근데 초래 시대당한저 초도 유바시대 때문에 니니도 다 칼라다 세월라서 봐지 세마신엘이야 안티도시제 그냥 디기주야다 강아세야데 됐을 때 용거로 봐 지나디 요 시디가블 키려야 말이지 나양 저기 삼당하지리야 소수기 맛이 녀려 소수기 변조 여바다 되니게 여바다 다지게 소수기 뇌비링리야 안지야 권철의 최고부야 나지 다디 인간주 삼나 가용 것은 아니 유대대 시월 소소 시디거래 다야 디디오라 지게디에 지구 시월에 다 시디에서도 지구로야마다 년여도다 규변저 판다스 가야마다 샤라샤라 저와 제고 하면도 밀려 뛴고 하면도 소소 지구라지 아버지나 지그래서 베게나 삼나 요마시 바스카야 말와 지나 디네기 아직 다 그래서네 그 지단 디네 레데 이나 셴레 뛴바다 셴랴 안지 펜버드에 지나 아직 셴랴 셴지를 뛰네 소소 개와사고로 소소 개와사디 디기용하데 셴레 뛰네 용고로마도 소소 지부 되네 디기용하 균에메로 와다 당고시네 당안즈를 지 소소리 로고야고시네 미셴지 소소기 로고야고네 소소리 디기용고래 세상 소소리야 셴레 뛰네 아주 디기주에데 셴레 뛰네 주고고래 수상한저 개와사야 돼 셴레 뛰네 주고고래 아주 콘로라사제 디니기 지 추보게네 셴레 뛰네 추보야오메 미셴메네 추보야메 디네 징야메 고고다사메 고고다베네 셴레드네 자선셴네 셴레드네 고시오구도아 셴레드오구도아 제 셴레 마데바 고고다사요 말아 자선셴세 구마구세요 말에 소스지보데는 수절로 구마구고 고에메르와 제자 셴세데 제자 소수게 개와주베네 세버곰나 셴레드네 세버곰고래 짐바타나 셴레 짐바탄고래 다 소수이 잠니지곰나 셴레드네 잠니지곰고래 제자다 소수게 누섬다도 셴세 빼마서 개 첨부 소수게 사야동야 둘로고야 차상 샹라 때는 용도 봐지 셴세의 자 첨부의 개진 첨부修习的300 3단 다시한 아주래 균유촌에 따다 연定유촌에 따다 이유로 지상은 냠는 집에값로 균유촌에 마다 연定촌에 따고 그래서 지난 밀리아 연대제 균 이용고로 봐 냠는 집에값로 그 연定촌에 따장아들 딘디딘시 나 연定촌 따도시는 셴디 펜토 침부를 샹아 개발사바나 셴리 콘솔리 때네 개발사투고 나 쇠바지 고만에 콘솔리 때네 쇠바 고며 고거라기도 나 짐바지 나이나 콘솔리 때네 짐바나 고거를 빼 야고래도 와서 셴리야 지상 디네자 셴딩알레 진침부르샤 당연 셴리 판도라 지고도 셈비게 다 셈주게 용거래 지나 판도 지고도 지상 다 인자 소수기 변조를 탑지해 봐야 돼 어디 변조도 소소 지구만 해 셴리 변조 따다 셴리 판도 주야 시동에 변조 사기가 지금 이제 변조 어떻게 사기 선바 되네게 삼다제 변조라사 디사바데 셴리 편바주도는 되네고 아주 고해지로와 셴 미교벌레 로봇체알 변조면 소수게 로봇체 되메로와 지사 되네자 셴리 로봇체 바 셴이 동아세알이야 먼저 판도 지고 그래 판도지나 상징이 돈에 로봇체 판도 주야 양 지금 롭종 마신바디 셰바 바 롭종这些 셈리 토네 하고바지 신바지는 안 편도 주야 판도 주다 딩이바데 메르와 야나 그 변조하다 콜메다 둘로하다 칼라다 데네진 로바제야다 지 강발라 소바 데네도 로바제야 야나 그 셈보 셈나 롭종 그 베네 삼로다다 야기 야가 쳐데 삼다다 말랍 난 누가 쳐 삼다 디다교 마스 팔롭종 제제 디토네 로바제야 메 디니마도 메로 데니마도 메디 셴로 로바체라 가서 니가 고구도 왔다 가지래 변조야 고구도 셴로 로바체고 然后소수게 셴리야 롭든 제하데 신고구도와 신제 안 되네 지고다 되네 지고 요마다스 롭도제 신고 지실레 페버주발라 다 가지 저기 되네기 여바디 년유도다 안 소수게 코르 여바다 되네기 안지게 소수게 안지게 녀화 소수게 다보자시베 셈제로 주여베네 소수게 개와사베기 땡을 바제 판도 제세계 율루 줍투브제네 소수를 세대를 배주 침부 요에돼 봐 안델라드네 개와 치마이나 개와사지 소수기 여바데 변조로지나 소수기 시연의 변조여베네 셴리아 펜버주벌 다샤베나 안디기 돈에 셴도 셴리아 안지 판도 주도 디 소소라 개와사요 봐. 디네자 아직 두시네 베지 땅투는 소소기 잠비 군로 토네 베지 땅투나다 소소 마신예래야 소소기 디네기 판바게치모 주투야디 연구요 봐서 나 디네기 현든 주비게 체도 제수 차상 야고 현에 판보주야라 데 야고 고야 차고로 와다.
Everything that the Buddha taught, he taught so as to help us develop our wisdom, our intelligence. If we really think well about the teachings of the Buddha, we'll recognize that the general way of thinking is off to a bit of an extreme. And the purpose of the Buddha's teachings is to bring us in accord with reality, with how things actually are. So therefore, we need to be careful not to misunderstand the Buddha's teachings and go off to another extreme. So when reading this verse, in brief, each time we are born and every time we die, we are born alone and we die alone. Thus, our friends, loved ones and so forth, all let us down. What never lets us down is the sacred Dharma. It is quite conceivable that some may well misunderstand a verse like this and the teachings around it, thinking, well, as I come into this world alone and I leave this world alone, I should stay away from others. They cause more problems than good. And likewise, I will also, as I did in my last life, all the wealth I acquired, no idea where that is now, so too with all that I've acquired in this life. So I should let that all go. And one can all too easily go off now to a new extreme. This is not the purpose of the Buddha's teachings. This is a deep and flawed misunderstanding of the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha's teachings are meant for us to help us develop our wisdom and intelligence and come to understand reality, how things actually exist. So with all teachings, we need to interpret them or understand them through a lens that is in accordance with reality and guard ourselves from any possible tendency to go off at an extreme, to be guided perhaps by over-enthusiasm, and rather keep our feet grounded. So the Buddhist path is quite clear, quite straightforward, but it's also very subtle. It's always about trying to get a balance. What we are trying to do in terms of, for example, material pleasure, is we do require a degree of material comfort. We do require a degree of material pleasure. We should eat our food and we should enjoy our food. If it's delicious, all the better. Likewise, we shouldn't want problems, seek out pain and hardship. It's fine to want to be freed of this. But the balance rather one should be trying to get is in terms of our way of thinking. What we value and prioritize is to no longer be obsessed with achieving temporary happinesses and overcoming insignificant problems, but rather see the pleasures of this life and the problems of this life in their true balance, in their true strength, and thereby enjoy the pleasures, overcome the problems, but not have them dominate our mind, not have their achieving them dominating our mind. This is the balance we try to get. As well as, of course, friendships. We need companionship. But the way we engage with our relationships with others needs to be more balanced. Coming to recognize that the true source of happiness is not found within others, but within our own mind. Also, the suffering and problems we experience is not due to others, but it's due to our own way of relating to circumstances. So we're trying to walk a very fine path that is not going off to either extreme. And it is a path of wisdom, of intelligence, where we are learning a far more skillful way to move through the world. When we think about these points at a deeper level, it serves to really help our later understanding of reality, of interdependence. Because we do require a degree of material comfort and pleasure, and we do require others in our life. We do not exist as independent entities, as we saw a moment ago in the meditation on selflessness, but rather we exist dependently. Part of this understanding comes down to the deep entwined interpersonal relationships that we have with beings. For our spiritual development, we need a degree of material comfort. Otherwise, we'll be impoverished and we will struggle to sustain our life. Likewise, we need to have friendships and relationships with others. Otherwise, we will be lonely and suffer. Moreover, our development of the skills that we already have in this life, all of them have come about in dependence on others. This needs to be recognized. Because in that first step of the meditation on emptiness, we try to see how we appear to our mind as being independent. We don't really recognize the role that others play in our life. The mere fact that we can understand this teaching, understand language, is dependent on others. That we can read this text is dependent on others. That we have the skills we have for the work we do is dependent on others. In so many ways we are dependent on others. We are not independent, separate from others. Then from a spiritual point of view, this is very true. That whatever we know of the teachings of the Buddha is dependent on others. For example, the Buddha himself and the entire lineage of beings over millennia that have kept those teachings alive and vibrant. So too, on the ordinary people in our life, in dependence on whom we can read. We have the money to buy books, attend retreats. Moreover, in dependence on our teachers and our companions, our spiritual friends, our Dharma friends, we come to gather the qualities of the Dharma within us, developing minds of ethics and generosity and so forth. But to be a truly ethical person, to have a developed mind of ethical restraint, is dependent on us being guided and taught, dependent on us striving, and dependent on those in society, whether in our homes, our place of work, or generally in society, on us being ethical towards them. We can only develop a sincere attitude not to harm in relation to others. Likewise with the practice of generosity. This is entirely dependent on ourselves and others, this entwined interdependence. It's dependent on us being guided, it's dependent on us cultivating the mind of generosity within, and it's dependent on us being generous towards others, wanting to help others, wanting to benefit others, wanting to ease their suffering and bring about happiness to others. So therefore generosity is also dependent on others. So too with patience. With all these qualities, all the practices, we are dependent on both our own efforts to cultivate these minds within us, we are dependent on the guidance of our teachers, and we are dependent on being able to express these minds towards others. Our entire path of spiritual development is dependent on others. So this we need to think about well. When we think about this well, it serves two incredibly important functions. One, it challenges our sense of independence, this false sense of I, that everything that I have achieved is because I'm so wonderful. It challenges that. We come to recognize our interdependence with others, and therefore we are not independent. So it challenges our misapprehension of reality. Together with this, we come to see the importance that others play in our life, both intentionally and unintentionally. The strangers who grow our food, who prepare our food and then sell it, they have an impact on us. So in this way, we come to recognize our interdependence with others, and we start to value them, recognizing that our spiritual development, as well as our sustenance, is dependent on others. Thereby, we start to see others in a new way. We value them, we appreciate them in a new way. So therefore, both for the development of love and compassion and bodhicitta, as well as the understanding of interdependence and emptiness, this comes about independent on thinking deeply about our interconnected relationships.
All right, I didn't.
So thank you very much.